Sam Laughlin. Here. Ann Paulson.
Here.
Mark Matris.
Here.
Mark, I'm sorry. How do you say your last name, Mark?
Marchese.
Thank you. Viva Gaylor.
Here.
Mayor Pender. Councilor Petrie.
Here.
Councilor Paulson.
Here.
Councilor Ocholi. Councilor Moore.
Here.
Councilor Manella.
Here.
Councilor Thompson.
Here.
We have a quorum. Barry. All right. Our next motion is to elect officers. So I need a nomination for budget officers.
I nominate Sam as the president of the budget committee.
So Viva Gaylor nominates Sam Laughlin as president.
Second that.
Do I hear a second?
Kate's
Sorry, Kate, go ahead. Kate, was that a second?
Sure was. Yep.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to elect Sam Laughlin as budget president. By a show of hands, your online hand, please indicate whether you vote to approve or you vote to approve, please raise your online hand. I see 6 online, 7 here. For a majority, that's 7. All those opposed, please raise your online hand at this point in time. Seeing no opposed, motion passes 7-0-2. Adam Moore, are you on now? We'll move on.
Yes, I'm here.
Hold on. Okay, I'll mark you here then. All right, our next motion is to elect, budget officers. Those are those that, are in charge of monitoring and maintaining the budget throughout the year. Typically, this is, Mira San Juan and myself. Now you get a motion as such.
I move, as such, as you mentioned.
Right.
Oh, right, correct, you did it that way.
Budget President Sam Laughlin moves to appoint Michael Weston and Mira San Juan as budget officers.
Second.
Councilor Paulson seconds the motion. All those in favor, please raise your virtual hand, or in person, raise ours as well. 1, 2, 6, 7. So that motion passes 9-0-2. and one. Mark, can you find your online, hand? It's at the bottom.
At the
Miss-
bottom.
Oh, sorry,
Nice.
Mark Marchese.
I'm seeing participants, Q&A, chat, and share. So I'm not sure.
Okay, so it's not next to your share screen, you don't have a raise hand button?
No, I don't.
All right. If you like, just, chime in,
Yes.
vocally,
Okay.
then I will make sure I call
I am
on
in
you.
favor.
All right, thank you. So I'll put that as a 10-0. All right, with that, I'm going to hand over the running of this meeting to President Lachlan, who can take us through the remainder of the agenda.
All right, we're opening the meeting for the budget meeting for 2022, 2023 for King City. And on the agenda is item number 4, which is the presentation of the budget message and budget document. And I believe Mike Weston would like to speak to that agenda.
Can we share this, Ronnie? You have a share screen available with the budget document? I'm sure everyone has it. The first page within your budget document is the org chart. It's pretty expanded. We don't necessarily fill every single role that you see on this document, but this is the goal eventually and the organization in general. The next one is the budget message. You'll find that we typically budget conservatively on our revenues and liberally on our expenditures. This typically results in a higher carryover balance than what we're anticipating from the prior year. And as you can see, as we go through this document, our beginning fund balance is typically increased every year by $100,000 to $200,000. That being said, you'll find throughout this document that we are continuing our efforts in everything that we're trying to accomplish. We have a lot going on with master planning, with the street fund, with a number of city projects. Is that an echo or?
No, it's radio.
Okay, sorry. You'll see a net increase from the previous fiscal year, right around $350,000. We've been pretty lucky in our fund balances, increases from passport sales, increases from our Oregon liquor and marijuana tax increases. Our tax base has also increased, as well as our police levy was increased in the last year from 55 cents per thousand to 63 cents per thousand. All of these things have increased our ability to keep up with the times. That being said, ARPA came in as a relief fund to our city funds and has been a bit of a boost for us on some fiscal recovery. However, we're expecting that this next year is going to result in a higher spend rate than what we've done in previous years. And you'll see that we're projecting a net reduction in cash assets of approximately $410,000 over the next year. This is simply because we're starting with a beginning fund balance of $2.2 million and then ending with an approximate carryover balance of $1.8 million. Of course, this is a budget, so this is a projection. That's not necessarily going to be the end result. Typically, we've budgeted for a carryover balance of 1.8 million previous years, and we've managed to carry over 2.2 million this last year. I think it was like 2.1 million the year before, and 2 million the year before that. So just because we've budgeted for a higher expenditures doesn't necessarily mean that's what we're going to see in the end document. But again, this is a budget document, it is a plan, it is guideline for moving forward. So I did want to point that out and just point out that if this budget document is fulfilled to this level, that we will need to make adjustments or corrections later on, because a net loss in cash assets of $410,000 per year would be unsustainable for us to carry over. Okay? Bringing that to your attention, if there's no other questions, we'll jump into the financials. I'll give it a minute if anyone has any questions. All right, seeing no hands raised, no questions asked, we'll go into the financial summary of resources. As we look at this, you'll kind of see where our increases have been realized in the past. From 2020 up through this projected year, our beginning fund balance has increased by approximately $600,000. Our fees have stayed relatively on plane. Again, this is budgeting conservatively. What we've seen in the past is that those numbers probably dipped in 2020. That was the result of the decrease there after 2020 in 21, 22. And now we're expecting that they'll probably increase, but we're budgeting conservatively here for resources. So we use a smaller number. Federal, state, bonds, grants, gifts, allocations, donations, those have increased since our time here, mostly because of grant programs, ARPA, and the planning grants from Metro and from Oregon Department of Transportation. Revenue from bonds, we don't have any. Interfund transfers, internal service reimbursements, these are usually just internal transfers and moving money around into proper funds. And then our property tax estimate has continued to increase by approximately 3% each year, except when we annex areas, and then we see a boost to those numbers. Personnel services continue to climb. Cost. You'll see a slight reduction over last year. That might be the difference between the sergeant's position not being filled and just going with general officer. Materials and services have increased. We expect this to stay up with the inflation in today's market. Our debt service, of course, has increased with the finishing of City Hall and the repairs. The debt service for that City Hall capital outlay is about $100,000 every year. Again, interfund transfers, contingencies, slight decrease in our contingency fund. This is also associated and accounted for in that estimated $410,000 that we talked about in the previous message. And then when you look at the unappropriated ending balance, you'll see that reduction reflected as well. That being said, as you go into the next line item of the financial requirements and summaries, we're looking at, let's see, 12.75 now with the added. All right. So as the council may be aware, that we are hiring a administrative assistant, and we've just brought on another officer. So we should be up to full staffing levels this coming fiscal year. That will result in a slightly higher cost for personnel services that you'll see reflected in each of the departments. Any questions at this point in time? So we'll move on through.
I have one question.
Yeah.
On the debt service, 100,000 per year, how far is that projected out?
Like 15 year. I think it was a 15 year, if I remember correctly. We could pay it off faster if we wanted to get ahead of that and maybe save on some interest and things.
What is the interest on it?
It was like 3%, 3.25.
It's two something, it was,
But it got increased.
oh, did it?
It got increased when we went to the bond market.
Mm.
So it was 2.25 originally, and then we had to sell it on the bond market. And when we sold it on the bond market, it increased to closer to 3 point, was it straight 3? Or was it just slightly over? I think it was just slightly over, like 3.1 or 3.2 percent interest rate on it.
Do you anticipate possibly paying it off early?
I would like to. I think we need to kind of see where we're at financially. I think this is a test year, if you will, to kind of, this is kind of like the first year back into,
See when the dust settles?
right, after the pandemic and all the service shortages that we saw coming in through 2020. This is our first full year back at it, and it'll be good measuring stick that then we can see if there's additional funds to make additional payments.
That sounds like a good plan.
That was what I was thinking anyway, unless the budget committee wants to dedicate more resources now.
That interest rate, does it make, it's possible that it would go up again?
No, it's set rate, fixed rate at the 3.
I would say, see where it goes in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Is there any other inputs from the folks that are online on that particular issue?
I think it sounds reasonable to kind of use this as a test year. I agree with that.
And maybe like next year when we revisit this, we'll kind of decide whether it's something that we want to explore, maybe paying a little more, even if it's 25,000 or 50,000 every year, that knocks down the interest and overall liability and debt.
There's no penalty for early payment. Is that confirmed?
It has to go past the 10 years. So you have to pay for a minimum of 10 years. But after you pass the 10 year, you can pay it off at any time. So moving on, we'll go through the next page. Next page I've already covered, that's our tax rates. Our tax rate is 1.526. Our levy rate for the local option police levy is 0.63. And then you'll see what our outstanding debt currently is, 1.26 million. Moving over to the next one, you'll see a pie chart. The pie chart reflects where our spending typically is outlaid and where the most of our resources are coming from or going to. You'll see we have a cash carryover of 2.15 million. I thought it was supposed to be 2.2. Isn't that what the auditor said? 2.2. I believe the auditor reflected our carryover balance at 2.2 million, but 2.1 is close enough for what we're looking at right now. And then you'll see where the funds are going: property tax, other tax, and grants coming in, fees, license, passports, court fines, interest. These are all revenue, where our revenue is coming from for every fiscal year. The next page is our expenditures. You'll see our expenditures reflected on this one. You'll see that a large chunk is going to the contingency and reserve at almost 1.8 million, a little less. You'll see the city council at 95, the city manager at 250, finance and planning at 1 million and change, municipal courts at 100, building near 100, police at 1.2 million, public information is a small slice, and our debt service is 100,000. Moving right in, we'll cover the general fund resources. So we start off by budgeting what our resources are. We start out with a beginning fund balance of 2.2 million. This number is the number I was mentioning from our auditors. From that, you'll go through the line items here. You'll see some pretty sizable reductions in the liquor, cigarette, motel, and marijuana tax. That is due to Measure 110 coming live and reducing our revenues from marijuana sales. You'll see our grants are staying pretty much online. It's almost a carryover from last year since we haven't totally expended or finished the grants that we have. The grants that are currently outstanding are 2 grants from Metro. One is for the east-west transportation analysis, that's $130,000, and then we had a $300,000 grant from Metro's construction excise tax, and that is partially expended. So those are those 2. The other license fees and building permits, we're expecting some building permit fees to come through because of Ponderosa Pines, and also the subdivision at the corner of 131st and Fisher. Both projects, Ponderosa Pines is underway. The corner of 131st and Fisher is expected to be underway this spring, if it ever stops raining. Franchise fees have stayed relatively on par. But again, we budget conservatively, so it's less than what we'll probably actually see there. They've continued to increase every year I've been here with inflation, so I imagine that number, there might be some extra revenues in that franchise fee. We've adjusted the passport fee, or not the fee itself, but the revenue generated from the passport fee. Just because of the number of passports we are seeing on a daily, weekly basis has increased exponentially since the pandemic has run its course. School excise tax, you see that. Organ surcharge, water franchise fee, court fines. Probably, we wrote off a lot of the court fines in the previous couple of years, so we're going with a reduction on that. At this point, so I reduced the transfer from the park SDC because that park SDC is running lean at this point in time, to say the least. So we canceled the transfer. In the past, we've transferred $50,000 to $20,000 over into the general fund to pay for just staff time and efforts on park improvements out there. This time, I did not do that in the hopes that we could save some of the park SDC that we'll cover when we get to that a little bit later. All right, at the end of page 1, are there any questions or concerns with what you see here?
Well, with the SDC fund, that comes in because of zero, you're anticipating no homes are going to be built this budget year. So you've got fees, but building permits, that doesn't mean they're going to be collecting SDC funds yet until it's completed?
Well, I believe that we will let see some, but I'm not putting it here because I don't want to count my.
I don't think I would either.
All right, and so again, this is like the rest thing. So we try to budget and not that we don't know if we're going to get or not. But we anticipate that we will see SDC revenues from the Ponderosa Pines and the 131st and Fisher if they ever come through. So
Yeah.
That's our anticipation, but we're not registering it.
But you're anticipating at least some fees, like building permits,
Yes, yes.
during this budget cycle.
Yes, we typically, even under the 77 that we have budgeted here,
Yeah.
that's without those subdivisions. So we're just going off of what we typically generate on a yearly basis citywide, and we're not anticipating a big flow of building permit revenue from those houses because we're not banking on that money to come in.
Okay. Here.
But it would be nice if it
Well,
does.
not good either, but yeah.
If it does come in, that's a boon for that line, like, it's a boost to that line item for sure.
What was the metro tax that we haven't had before? Of $3,000? Like him.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's for the new housing, residential housing building permit, which is like pass through. So we collected from the building permit and then we just pay them. So you will see that under building department, it's the same amount. 3,000 for the metro tax and the school CEP, and then Oregon surcharge, those are like pass through.
After.
Under building department.
And so that goes to their housing? Is it
For the
housing?
new building, new residential,
What's the bill that Metro passed to, like that, you know?
what's it?
How is Metro levying this tax?
A clear company do.
We'll have to look into that, why. I believe it had to do with one of the bonds or measures that Metro passed, that's then essentially taxing the building permit, if I recall correctly, but I'll have to get some clarification on where that comes from. Is that a question the budget committee needs answered?
No, because it's a pass-through.
All right. I will give you an answer. Any other questions on page one?
Am I allowed to ask a question?
There's a section where we open it to public comment,
Okay,
and that's after we go through the whole review, so keep notes and,
gotcha.
we'll allow the opportunities to. Okay.
The next page is our general fund requirements. Starting with personnel, salaries, benefits, and payouts. You'll see a steady increase from 2019 to current years on what our salaries are. When I first started here, the city's salaries were woefully low and not very competitive on a regional standpoint. I think at this point in time, with the efforts of the city council and the efforts of staff here, that those salaries are much more competitive now than they have been in the past. And I think you'll see that reflected here. Over the course of the last 3-4 years, that number has increased by about almost 200,000 across the board for all staff involved. Of course, with the increase in salaries, also benefits have steadily increased. I think healthcare is probably one of those that every year goes up, a good 10 to 12%, seems like, every year. PERS is the other liability that we've seen steadily climbing as well over the years. $11.75. Did you have one on another line?
Yeah, no, because we have 2 full-time employees, one retire and one left, the police officer.
What about the ad of the,
The street fund?
No,
That's
the-
the-
oh, so you moved
yeah,
this one to
one
the street fund?
yeah. So that's $100,000, relocated to street fund. That's one of the full-time employees. You will see that in the street fund. Yes, he wants.
All right, so if anyone caught that, there's, $100,000 that's been moved out of this general fund and put into the street fund. So that will be reflected back on page 11. Yeah. Page 11 in your packet will be the street fund, and that's where you'll see that $100,000 from personnel services transferred into.
14.
And you'll see the other FTE accounted for at that spot.
Wherever under service contracted, because I see that on every category.
Yeah.
Every department. If it's a negative, that means the money is moving out of that account, and if it's a positive number, which I've seen, that means it's just moving money around. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure about
Yeah. That's the question every, we need to fix that,
You
yeah.
think I can
Now we
remember
have
that?
to put some new software, so we can.
That's the other thing, is we do have the new Cassell software should be coming online this next year. So for budgeting and auditing purposes, we should be able to help get a better definition or explanation on where all these monies are going, and how they're transferring to benefit other departments.
It'd be nice to know, people will look at that and go, well, if that's going to, where we are.
So, as we go down, you'll see our contract services are still like 500,000. This is up from preceding years, but this is mostly due to the long-range planning efforts. We have, like I said, about $300,000 going out this fiscal year into, the master planning and that's also reflected by grants that we received from Metro. So that's again a pass-through, bump there that you've seen. Our legal services having steadily increased, as have our audit and financial services. This is because we're doing more, and we've had more activities going on citywide with master planning, transportation planning, everything along those lines, and all of the public input and concerns surrounding those efforts have taken its toll on our legal resources, and so you've seen those increases on that. Financial planning, our financial, no, I'm thinking with Mr. Mars, audit and everything.
Financial planning?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying personnel-wise, what I'm saying is our contract services for Mr. Mars and through Clyde Rogers had increased this year.
Right.
Yeah, so we saw increases on our accountant and other things because we essentially went through a lot of the audit stuff twice due to personnel changes with the audit firm that we contracted with. And that cost us some extra time internally. Police department expenses, city manager expenses, finance and planning, all have seen increases as we grow. City council, those expenses have gone up because of the legal that's associated with that department, and other elements such as conferences and travel, right? So I think most of it's legal fees though. So I think the legal fees are kind of summed up into that department. Any questions on page 2?
Sorry, I have to ask again. This is a minor thing, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I noticed that under uniforms, for example, line item 18, when you go to the police department one, it says uniforms and cert supply. So maybe the new software will reflect that, I don't know, but I would like to see continuity between the different departments and the general fund as far as the wording goes. Because when I'm trying to track it, it's a little bit confusing. It's like, well, where does this go? It did balance, I know it did. In other words, could it say under general fund here, uniforms and cert? How was it worded?
The uniform is for the police department.
And service supply. And
And search supply, I got you.
you know what I'm saying?
So it matches up with what it's being used for in the other end, yeah.
Because when I'm sitting there trying to go back and forth and see how they go, it was a little bit of a guessing game, not too bad.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Just so the words. The uniforms and service supply under the police department.
Another page, next one, please.
Gotcha.
Makes no difference on the budget, just.
Gotcha. All right. So what President Loughlin was saying is on page 10, we have it as uniforms and search supply, but on page 2, we have it just as uniforms. So those need to match. Yeah. Vehicle maintenance, we are predicting a little bit higher vehicle maintenance because we have one car that's dragging a little bit last year. Hopefully, we're getting that one fixed. And in-house hopefully, but we're also trying to add a vehicle with the police department. We'll talk about that one a little bit later. If we can find a used one for a reasonable cost. All right, any other questions on page 2? On page 3, this is just going to cover our contingency and operating funds for the future. It also is going to have our debt service for the City Hall remodel, which we'll see on line 12. The operating contingency at $600,000. You'll see the reserve for future expenditures on line 21. So I just want to talk about this really quick. We get that number in the budget message of a reduction of about $410,000 by taking the carryover balance from the year preceding from fiscal year 21, 22, and then we minus the 1.89 million from that to figure out what we're losing, or what the reduction in overall cash resources are estimated at. So the previous year we had, the 2.248 million, and then we're estimating that we're going to have, this is wrong, 7, oh, plus the 100,000.
So you need to, you got the one.
Gotcha. Sorry. Just flipping it in my mind. So on line 22, you'll see the 1.89, and you minus the 100,000 on that, so you get the 1.79.
1.79, that's contingency.
Yeah, so 1.79 is a contingency because you have the 1.8 minus 100,000 above. Any questions on page 3? Moving on. Of the general fund expenditures, we kind of covered most of these previously. We talked about the 100,000 over to the street fund for personnel. We've increased the office supply fee to include postage. This is because our passports been going gangbusters lately, and we're spending anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a week on postage, depending on the week. So we've now bumped that number up to account for that. Now, most of that we actually collect a fee for, so it's a net benefit to the city overall. So the city benefits 40% of each postage that we sell. 40% of the revenue generated from that comes to the city. Again, you'll see the contingency and reserve for future expenditures called out in the summary sheet. And we can go to the requirements if you like on page 4, unless there's no if there's no question. All right. Page 4, pretty straightforward. This is city council. We have some for membership dues, training, travel, very minor in vehicle expense and meals. Minor special department expenses, the auditor's expense comes out of this, and the legal fees. That's the bulk of what is being taken out of this particular fund, or what expenditures are in this particular fund. We do have software, hardware upgrades of about $1,000. That's in case we need to do iPad work or new emails or what have you. Any questions on page 4?
Yeah. Under one, it's only $100. I don't even want to bring it up. Under city council, you said page 4?
Yeah.
No, I don't have any questions on page 4.
Okay. Any questions online? Hearing none, we can go to page 5, the city manager fund. City manager department fund. In this one, you'll see our services contracted to start off, office supplies, utilities, that's for the building in general. Our contract services remained relatively steady. Some have gone up. This includes the park maintenance, copier maintenance, and payroll services. Again, with bringing Cassell online, some of those payroll services are being done in-house now, so that should hopefully save us some money in the future. You also see building maintenance, any travel, conferences, meals, any sort of subscriptive services. We do have elections coming up and advertising, that's also denoted here. And then you have any sort of additional work on City Hall and software upgrades, computer requirements, things of that nature. With that, are there any questions on page 5?
Building maintenance, is that typically like janitorial type services, lawn care, and all that kind of stuff?
That's correct, yeah. So we have, for this building, we have Espresso Services who comes and does cleaning once a week, actually twice a week. And we have a landscape crew that comes by twice a week as well, out front and around the building. So they're the ones that do our lawn maintenance and trim the bushes and things and keep the place orderly and clean.
My initial reaction when I saw the number was, why is it going up for a new building? And then I thought about it and pretty much came to that conclusion that everything's going up and maintenance is just, you have to do.
We didn't have, for the longest time, we didn't have a janitorial service for the building. So we would do like once a week, we'd break down and, you know, vacuum everything and go around and clean things. Once we got into the new city hall, the city council determined at that point in time that, you know, the staff probably shouldn't be wasting their time cleaning up the city hall once a week, and hired the janitorial firm to come and do it.
Reminded me of it.
Yeah, it's nice.
But if something goes wrong with the building itself, it would still be under that category. You know,
Yeah.
The roof had to be repaired or something.
Yeah, and then we'd probably have to come back for a supplemental budget, yeah, move money around to do that. Okay. Any other questions on page 5? Seeing and hearing none. On to page 6. Finance and planning. You've seen, of course, we talked about salary increases, benefit increases, for personnel services. We are trying to add one personnel here for the, admin position. It's an accounts receivable position as well, so it's part-time admin, part-time accounts receivable. Office supplies, we've just seen steady increases on that. Again, you'll see the postage and credit card fees rolled into that office supply number. That's the additional $30,000 that you see there for postage. And again, that's kind of a pass-through element, and the city sees a benefit of about 40% of that overall. Utilities, contract services. Again, the contract services is the long-range planning. Otherwise, there's really no big surprises along this. Computer hardware monitoring and GIS systems, you'll see those reflected under the software, hardware, computer monitoring, phone system. You also have the website pulled into that as well, if I'm not mistaken.
No website,
Where's the website at?
public.
So public, and actually the website will be rolled into the public information department a little bit later. Any questions on page 6? All right, move on. Page 7, you'll see the public information. The $5,000 is the city website maintenance, and thought it was a little less than that, but we also have other elements like GIS and everything else rolled into that as well. Any questions here on page 7 before we roll 8? All right, rolling to court. Again, we go over the salaries, benefits. Those are all captured earlier as well. We still have one person allocated to that fund at 3/4 time. Office supplies, everything's staying relatively neutral. One thing that we probably would like to see increase on this would be our revenue from court fees, but that's not necessarily reflected here. It's reflected on the first page. So, any questions on page 8?
I have a question.
Sure.
Under total personnel services is listed at $85,975. However, the revenue you talked about a little bit is $31,000. I ask this every year. Does it make sense to have a court? And if it does, what's the plan for increasing the revenue to make it worthwhile? We don't have to have a court, if I understand it right. Be taken over by the county or another city.
Possible. I'd have to look into it to see. But you make a good point. If we're not making any money off the court revenues,
We're losing money, if you go by that.
we need to take some serious reflection there. And
It seems like it's more of a headache than a.
I hate to decrease any opportunity to generate revenue.
Well, that's why I asked the question, then what's the plan to bring that back up? It was significant at one time, and it's decreased a lot. I know part of it was at the beginning of the COVID situation, there weren't as many cars on the road.
Yeah,
That's not the case anymore.
right. So we will need to get on that. Right now, I don't have my chief or lieutenant here to answer that question,
Okay.
but I agree that that needs to be looked at, and we need to see some gains on that in order to keep it functional.
But then you don't want to be accused of writing more tickets. just to
Right.
get revenue,
Yeah.
Right, so.
Yeah, and I mean, do we have ticket revenues? Hold on.
Hey, Mike, this is Kate. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Was the court losing money before COVID?
Hang on one second. I don't believe so. I mean, I believe that we bring in a decent amount of ticket revenue from the court system. But it's more budget neutral, even in, we've had years where it's been low and years where it's been high.
Okay,
We did open the school, like driver school,
Yeah, the traffic school.
and so we started doing traffic school instead of just writing our fines to, Washington County. Because
Okay.
a portion of everything that we pay to the state and we have to pay to Washington County. And if we do a traffic school, that opens up a more linear path for us to recover funds. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. I think that's a good call out by President Lachlan, and I would love to see like if there's any way we can also cut expenses for the court and look at a revenue increase there.
Something we can look at. As for, I mean, we don't have very much allocated to the courts itself. We have court twice a month. We pay Judge Luby a very minimal amount for that, and you'll see that under the professional services. It's very reasonable rate considering, you know, he's here once, twice every month. But I agree with what President Lachlan is saying, that we need to definitely raise revenues one way or another here. But aren't the court fees set by state law?
Yes and no. Like the student, the
Drivers.
driver's ed, we can raise if we needed to.
All right.
I can ask other cities what they're doing. Like me personally, I know Beaverton because my wife got a ticket, she did the school, and they made her pay half the ticket. That was like $200. So there's options with that. The state ORS's, the maximum is like, I want to say off the top of my head, it's $250. We can't go over that. But then again, we pay $50 to the state, $16 to the county, and then the rest, $20 the police department gets, and then the rest the city gets.
So President Lachlan, you said we're generating about 86,000,
Yeah,
but we're spending about 100,000, right?
that's according to your numbers, I saw.
So we're losing about 20,000, it looks like.
And then, also, we gotta remember in COVID times, we did not write any tickets.
Right,
Moratorium.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it was,
I mean, we definitely suffered losses on that. Okay. We're, you know, are we just budgeting 31,000 a year? Is this what we have on?
That's why we including the. The right now.
All right,
Once the review in, so
all right. So
the
is,
actual revenue is not.
right. A loss of 60,000. This is 31,000. 100,000,
Oh, you mean, okay.
it's like 70,000. We need to increase revenues by $70,000 or somehow stop the program. So I think what we've determined is that budgeting conservatively here, we're seeing a net reduction or a net loss out of this department of anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 per year. Right?
Yeah.
So we either need to find a way to raise that money, raise more money in that department, or come up with a plan on what we do with the future.
Is some of the loss of revenue because we're writing off the old?
Yeah.
Which it looks like you had a revenue last year of 2021, of 184,
Yeah.
and then we have 31, that's $150,000 drop right there. And is that because we are taking a hit from years ago where we were just carrying that debt?
Yeah.
And so that's misleading on what the court is actually
Well,
revenue, because you're writing off 150 that's from prior years that has nothing to do with the last couple of years.
that's true to a sense. What ends up happening is the officers write the tickets, so theoretically, the revenue from those tickets would cover the court fees, but then people don't necessarily pay the court fees, and then they go into a delinquent account, and it just sits there delinquent and possibly never gets paid. And so we're not realizing the total value of the program because we're losing those revenues that aren't being paid.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was they had to pay it up front, then it would probably pencil, right? But since it's a system where people typically will go delinquent, not paying their court fee or their fine, and there's not much other than collection that we can go for them for a traffic fee, right? They're not gonna throw them in jail over, not paying their speeding ticket or something, but they'll hit them with collection. And that's what we see. We see a loss of revenue there because there's a larger portion of the population that just isn't paying their fees. And then we have to write it off, and it's a loss.
When you hire a collection agency, they only collect a certain percentage after they get paid. You don't pay them anything unless they collect, right?
That's correct. They get a percentage, I think, of everything that comes in. I think is how that collection works.
Yeah, for the, ORS, if we send the bill in for $2,000, we get the $2,000, and then they charge
On top of
The delinquent person.
the delinquent person that percentage, whatever that
Once it
percentage.
has already been turned over to collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if you collected it.
So we did write off a very large number the last couple of years.
The reason for that is because when they're not paying and not contact us, the judge will give them a maximum amount of per ticket. So, when they find out, they freak out, right? So they come back to the court, talk to the judge, you know. I guess that's the only way they come back, otherwise they will never contact us, you know, for the like 250 fine, the ticket. So, come back, talk to the judge usually reduce back to original amount. So that 2,000 is not actually the ticket amount, but it's our receivable. So we have to put it in the book. That's why we have to write off. Yeah, so, next year with the Castel new system, probably we have better system to track it. So hopefully next year the budget,
Well, I'll ask the same question next year.
Well, I think
Hopefully I won't have to ask that question, right?
I think if we can't do something to improve that number, then we need to start coming up with a strategy on how we deal with it.
Yeah, that's all I ask.
Right?
What rule of thumb are you using? How old are they when you write them off? How old is a delinquent?
10 years.
So after 10 years, you write it off?
Yes, everything. I think,
Yeah.
pass the resolution.
10 years is the line now. The judge can extend it.
Yeah.
The judge can extend it, another like 7 years or something like that. But we've rarely seen it come in. We've rarely seen any funds come in after that point. like most of those are well delinquent, they're not gonna pay it, they don't care about their driver's license, they're out there driving without it. They're just in collection. So, I don't know what kind of legal means are in our,
I do know that if they don't pay a ticket, we does have an option to do a warrant, but that means we also have to go to, our court would have to be in, what is that called, court of records, which means we have a person in here typing,
you know,
word for word and all that, and we're
More expensive.
not ready for that.
Yeah.
So,
something to look at, something to study. I would agree.
Make life easier for you. I understand you don't want to give up the potential to have some revenue, but that's why we're really writing tickets.
Also for the court expenditure, most of it from the personnel, and which is the 3/4 time employee, and she's helping police department and admin, you know.
Yeah,
So
passports.
9 divided by-
That's where that 0.75 came.
Yeah, and while, you know, a portion of her time does go to court, I would say most of her time goes to passports and,
It just moving that around.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's not really fair to put all this in on that one department when,
Yeah, I understand. Always change that a little bit.
yeah, I agree. I think that number probably needs to be adjusted more. A portion of this probably needs to go to general fund.
And you may have said this before, and I apologize, special department expenses, what?
Well, that's the court payment we pay to Washington County for the tickets generally in King City, but they wrote the ticket and we have to pay them.
that's just $16 per ticket.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
So,
Yeah, that's right, it's the state as well. So the state takes their chunk, Washington County takes their chunk, we get what's left.
So this number will reflect the revenue, 30,000.
That number would actually go up if you had more
More revenue.
ticket revenue.
Right.
I'm good.
On to the next page. There's no other question. Page 9 is the building department. Typically, we see the building department as a revenue neutral boost. In the next coming years, we are going to be taking on a heavier load ourselves due to the new building code laws, rules, and stipulations that state that we have to have an identified building official here and in the city. So a portion of my time is now going to being that dedicated person for the city to host building complaints, appeals to building decisions, permit decisions, things of that nature. So at least for the time being, I'm that person until we can grow a little bit more maybe and have a building official as a full-time position. So part of that ad is that part of the bill that went through the state legislature was to eliminate the third-party contracting around the state. And part of the fix that came out of the legislature was that the cities had to appoint the in-house person to oversee the building activity. So while that's not reflected here in the personnel services, since my time is already reflected under the city manager role, that might be something that we see called out more in the future under this department. As it is right now, contract services, we're projecting a little bit higher next year. But we're also expecting that we're going to see more revenues as well. So is there any questions on page 9 before we move? All right, page 10, we were talking about this just a little bit ago. This is the police department fund. Pulling through on salaries and benefits, we have what equates to one fewer position overall. That's because we don't have the reserve officers plugged into there anymore. Before we had 2 reserve officers plugged in, which equated for 1 full FTE on that. And then in 2020, we also had the sergeant's position plugged in as well. So you'll see that kind of as a reduction, but you'll also see that, you know, as we mentioned earlier, that the salaries and benefits have continued to climb in order to remain competitive on our region-wide. You'll see some increases, office supplies increase, apartment supplies. You'll also see on here that we have some money for, what's the name of the, flexible, or, so we have contract services is reflected at $40,000. Lexipol for doing our policy manual is in that. You'll also see grant expenditures. We have a generator plugged in there, $32,000. Under the contract services as well is the region access, the dispatch service. Vehicle expenses we talked about previously about doing some vehicle repairs. We also have a vehicle purchase under the capital outlay of $50,000. Of course, that's not enough to buy a new vehicle, but hopefully we can find a nice used vehicle from one of the adjacent departments. Other than that, we're basically staying on par. There are some increases that we've seen over the past few years. A lot of this is due to just increased costs of doing business. But I'll take questions on page 10 if there are any.
This might be my last question. Item 15, line item 15, equipment repairs and maintenance. And I'm assuming that is for police equipment, not building maintenance or anything like that, right?
Yeah. That's my understanding too, is their equipment, like their vehicles, their MDTs and connections in their police vehicles and
Yeah.
maintenance for, the equipment that they have, radios. I think radios has been a big one lately.
Okay. So that's kind of what I figured it was, so that's where I put it under that category. So the only question I have is on the building maintenance. It's $4,800 for the police and it's $44,400 for city manager. Is there any, what's the reason behind how you broke that up as far as building maintenance? Because I think the police department requires a lot of space in the building. I know you probably have a good reason for doing it that way. I'm just kind of curious.
I agree, it probably should be, some of it should go into here, because they do take up an equal amount of space.
It won't make any difference on the books, right? They just,
Yeah, it's just one of the things we need to fix it, and this line item on the budget, seems not like clear.
hang on, let's see that one right. There's vacuuming right there.
I would agree with you, President Loughlin, that we probably need to split that building maintenance fee and put a portion of it into here.
Yeah.
New point, because I mean, it doesn't, I guess on the books, it really, it's all the same amount.
It makes more sense to split that number evenly between departments, considering everyone's using the building, so.
Yeah, it makes you look bad and it's all on your budget.
Yeah. I just like to spend money on that.
Yeah. We're pretty happy about it.
We are pretty happy about this building, though.
Yeah.
Very nice.
You should be. Okay.
Any other questions on the police fund? Moving to the street funds, we have a couple, street projects planned for this next year. We have, I'm going up memory here, Camino, Queen Anne, and Carmel, slated for construction. And those, have a total expenditure, I think it was like 200,000, right? Is that under capital project? Oh, yeah, page 15. So you won't see it reflected in, oh, toward the end, there, too. So those will be about $218,000 contracted under street operations. That'd be line 17 on page 15. That's the street repairs, right?
Line item number
Street
10.
improvement, 10.
Yes.
I don't think those 3 roads would cost that much, though.
No, it's not cost number, so we budgeted the number. The budget just carry over the same, number from this year.
Oh, from last year.
From last. So this year, this budget year is then like 100 something thousand. This is
Right.
400, so we just use that number.
Alright,
But
So-
actually we-
alright. So as Mira was explaining it, we budget, again, conservatively on expenditures, so we're estimating 400,000, but we believe it's gonna be about 218,000. That should leave us some extra funds in that account. Okay, that being said, we can start on page 11, where we have our net working capital and revenue, and our resources coming in from the state gas tax, coming in from the county tax, coming in from privilege tax, and then surface water management from clean water services. For a total resource revenue of about $1 million in our street fund. I just want to say before I go to the next page that right now I'm in conversations with Clean Water Services about the possibility of modifying our agreement for surface water management so that maybe we can start doing more of that in-house, which will give us a higher revenue rate, but then more responsibility on our shoulders for maintaining the stormwater system within the city. So that's going to be one of those growing things that we need to undertake at one point or at some point in the future as we grow to the west.
What kind of services do you have in mind?
So, well, by taking on the stormwater, we also open ourselves to revenue streams. So the fee that you pay every month on stormwater, sanitary, and water, all that goes straight to Clean Water Services. And we see $60,000 for our share in an annual basis, which isn't very much. So what we're proposing to do is take on the stormwater side of things and maybe even some of the maintenance of those lines. So the maintenance of the lines, the catch basins, the installation of those catch basins, and that way we can develop our own capital improvement projects as well within the city limits and take on those projects ourselves, either through personnel or contract services. That would mean that fee that the ratepayers pay every month would come to the city, and we would be able to then have a stormwater department or public works department that's funded by those fees. It would be roughly 6 million, I think, is what we've estimated on an annual revenue basis. Yeah, I think it's worth looking at. We've looked at other cities, and similar sized cities will have a roughly about a $10 million budget for water, $8 million budget for sanitary, and about a $5 to $6 million budget for storm. So
you need some major equipment.
we would need equipment for sure to take it on.
So what is it, in that garage you're renting?
No, it won't. That's another thing that we'll need to look at going down in the future is that, we need to find a way to have a yard for public works equipment, and we would have to equip ourselves with the proper equipment to be able to handle the maintenance duties associated with that. So it would be a bit of a big step and growing, there would have to be an initial investment, possibly even some debt service encumbered to fully equip ourselves in order to take it on, but then we'd have the revenue to come in to help pay for that.
It's
Probably.
not uncommon for a city that's size.
Right, and as we start growing there, I think the thing that we'll need to look at is when it becomes sustainable, right? When it becomes sustainable and when it's actually financially beneficial to us. And I think at that point in time, that's when we need to, take the step and take that in-house.
Yeah.
Right now, I think we're close, but I don't think we're quite there yet. But I think with the growth out west coming, it might be a good time to look at how close we really are through like a financial study or something to that effect and see.
Yeah.
Any questions on page 11? Resources, all right. We'll go to page 12. We have an operating contingency of about $322,000 being carried over. Expecting that. That will be reflected into the beginning fund balance for next year, hopefully. We have total allocated requirements of $676,000. Any questions on page 12? Page 13, we have our garage rental. This is where we store our tools, equipment, those sort of things next to City Hall here. Surface maintenance, this is typically for potholes, small item projects, road signs, things of that nature. Dave is out there all the time, fixing up the planting strips and cleaning up, and this is basically his operating budget for taking care of those small budget items. Any other questions here? Moving to page 14, our street operations, services contracted. This is our personnel fees for our one FTE that we have working out there. Insurance expenses, the professional services, this is kind of like our engineering through like Murray Smith and Associates, who comes over our road designs, engineering, contracting, rent and lease payment, that's the garage next door. Vehicle maintenance, we have a truck out there that's in need of some service as well. Surface water management, if we have to go out there and clear out a catch basin on occasion and make sure the water's drained properly. Street light expenses is citywide, so we've taken on some additional street lights. That number has increased since 2016, still reasonable and still within the management that we're doing. Contract services have stayed pretty straight across. We did lose Small Cities Act money, SCA allotment, or Small Cities allotment from ODOT. I think that's reflected on the next page, you'll see that. But before we go there, are there any other questions on page 14? Then we'll go ahead and move to 15. Here you'll see the reduction of that $100,000 small cities allotment grant. That's because our city population is over 5,000 now, and we no longer qualify. We are still seeking out other means to acquire local street fund revenues. There's some programs out there through ODOT and TGM and others that might help us on our roads, so we're going to be exploring that over the course of the next year or so. Hopefully we're on a steep learning curve and able to figure it out. Any questions here on the street improvements, on what we have outlined? as we mentioned earlier, carrying over that budget number of 404,000, but we anticipate that it's only going to be about 218,000. That might leave us some funds here. Any questions on page 15, input? All right, we'll move on to the Parks SDC. The Parks SDC is essentially designated to park improvement. And the improvements have to be on the SDC list. So sometimes we can get a legal interpretation that allows us to do improvements. We were able to do that for the field improvement. We were able to do that for play fields because that was part of the Park SDC original agreement. So some of the capital improvements that we've done over the last couple of years are the drainage at the field and installing the drainage and then reseeding. And a lot of the backstop and ball field expenses were paid for through in-kind donations from Albion Soccer, Flash Baseball, and Blast Softball. And now Skyhawk Youth Sports is also participating in revenue share out at the park as well. So hopefully, as we do improvements at the park, maybe we can generate more revenues and put them back into this fund. But it is just a fledgling program and really hasn't started much. But we are anticipating that we'll get some. As we go through, the contingency here is 90,000, down 10,000 from last year. We are trying to make sure that we set aside funds for the park and use them only at the park. So as you can see, we have a total requirements here of about 135,000, 115,000 of that is not being spent or being set aside. So when you think about the park fund for what our working capital is, we've got roughly $100,000 to $115,000 for this year or next year. So is there any questions on page 16 of the Park SDC fund? We're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. The TDT tax, these are transportation development tax funds. These can only be spent on certain roads in certain roadways. Our TDT fund and our TDT streets are Fisher Road, 131st Street, and Deep Bend. Those are the only three TDT approved facilities that we have. We just spent about $1.3 million on the street improvement of 131st Street to add bike lanes and address the pedestrian crossing on the south side of the school driveway. That leaves us a total balance of about $620,000, and as development comes, that fund will grow again, and we should see a replenishment of that account over time. But again, it can only be used on those three streets, Fisher, 131st, and Deep Bend. And if we want to add facilities to it, it has to meet a regional need. And it has to be, I believe, in the Regional Transportation System Improvement Plan. And it has to be approved by the Washington County, it's the WCCC.
Washington County Coordinating Committee.
Coordinating Committee, thank you, Washington County Coordinating Committee.
I used to be a member.
Yeah, and so I imagine depending on the route selected from like what's going to be the primary route going east-west, it may qualify for TD funds, but it would most likely have to connect to the current Fisher road system in order to qualify.
We have a representative there.
Yeah.
It's competitive.
It is very competitive, and my guess is that if whatever comes out of the east-west analysis thing, if they choose to go with a route that doesn't provide for a fluid connection to Fisher, then it probably won't be qualified for TDT funds. just so the council's aware of that and the budget committee's aware. But that's future stuff, not necessarily.
Well, when was the last time we had something approved?
It would be 131st Street.
That was the last.
That was the last one that we had approved. And we also did Fisher Road just before that.
Yeah.
So we've spent a lot of money out of this fund in a very short period of time. And now we're kind of gonna have to try to rebuild it now, because we did do Fisher Road, which was a cost share program between us and Washington County, half and half. And then we did 131st Street as well. So those were pretty big expenditures.
I have a question on the Fisher Road that a gentleman was in here before. He felt that we'd run out of money where they'd been the retaining wall. I thought that you kind of done just what the plan was, and is there any future plan, I guess, to extend that Fisher Road? No, Fisher Road retaining wall.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be nice. I think it was the plan of the council at the time to extend that at least down to 124th Street. But there was some opposition at the time to the wall itself. There was opposition to the wall itself. And so Washington County, who was the project leader or project manager of that particular project, was only willing to put it in and along the properties of owners who were willing to participate in the program, or who were willing participants. And so that's why, like the first person didn't want their arborvitae hedge pulled out, so they left the arborvitae hedge. The next person they went down to, they had set that other arborvitae hedge, so it looked like it was going to be a pattern, if you will. And then they didn't get permission from a couple other owners there, and so that's where they stopped the wall. But that's that last arborvitae hedge. But now we have interested people that are down that road now that are like, hey, that wall looks pretty nice, my neighbors enjoy it, I'd like to have it. The problem is now is that we're no longer in the project window, and it would create a whole nother mobilization thing. And what we found was that where we put the wall also coincided with where PGE had their underground line. So before we'd be able to re-kick the wall and restart the wall, we'd have to get PGE out there probably to move their line again, because it's right along the easement line. So it seems like a simple project, but I think it's a bit more challenging than just, but I know that that's on our mid-range goals for a wall on there, so mid to long-range goals.
And what would fund that?
We could-
PGE or partly, or?
We could fund it out of the street fund,
Okay.
potentially, or the general fund. It would have to be like a pet project that we put money aside for.
Thank you, and Lynn Uford, thank you.
Alright. Hopefully we'll get it done eventually if we get some funding set aside for it, you know?
Willing participants.
And willing participants, yes. Willing participants is the key, because we just don't have
Yeah.
funding to go out and purchase slope easements and everything that goes along with that. So we definitely need the participation. That's it. With that said, any other questions on page 17 before we move along? You can rotate that for you too, Jay. Yeah, we're done with 17. Going into the local option levy, this is for police services. We recently went through a election, and the levy passed significantly. So that increased the levy rate from 55 cents per thousand to 63 cents per thousand, which has been a huge help for paying for some of those contract services, such as the dispatch services over at WACA, some of our software requirements now. We still have others coming down the pipe at us right now, cameras. body cameras and requirements associated with that, are reflecting a huge hurdle for us administratively in the future, and something that we're gonna have to be cognizant and aware of as we move forward. Any other questions on the local option levy? Okay. Moving into ARPA. ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act. It was enacted in 2021. It was to provide COVID relief to businesses, employers, municipalities, employees who worked throughout the pandemic, as well as provide assistance for broadband and water disbursement, or expansion of those services. King City, in a cooperation with Clean Water Services, has looked at means and measures in which we could expand the purple line. It is a recycled water line, and trying to get that recycled water from the King City Golf Course out to the Bonneville Power Lines and down to the King City Community Park, as well as provide keys for future deployment of those services to the expansion area in the city of Tigard. This would put the line probably going down through Fisher, straight out with a pump station somewhere along the route, and then providing recycled water services to the King City Park, 131st Street, potentially the Highlands and Edgewater as well. So we are pursuing that. Looks to be about a $2 to $4 million project. I know that seems like a big range, but when you add a 30% contingency, that takes a big chunk in there. So right now, I think the refined numbers are probably like 2.4 million. But with contingency, I think we were looking at 3.3 million on that expansion of that line. And a lot of the money would come from other sources, like state legislature. Clean Water Services has some capital improvement funds as well. So hopefully we continue together and try to make this a successful project. Right now, it's still floating around the state and gathering a lot of momentum, and it is a relatively popular project. So hopefully we're able to get that off the ground. And we have a grant project for the King City eligible employers going live here. I don't know if that's actually out yet, but it was supposed to go live either late this month or early next month. So with that, are there any other questions on the special funds, ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act? That is it.
That's it, okay. That's the end of agenda number 4, the presentation of the budget meeting, or minutes, or message, I should say. If there's any additional questions from the budget committee, now's the time to speak. After that, we'll open it to public comments. So are there any other questions over this? I think we covered it pretty.
This is Annie Paulson. I have one question about the marijuana bill that passed that diverted funds from the city to the treatment of drug and alcohol. Will that expire at some point? Is there ever a chance that those funds could, come back to the city, or is that a permanent program?
As far as I know, Commissioner Paulson, that is a ballot measure that does not necessarily have an end term. So I think it's ongoing unless it's overturned at some point in time, but it's a loss of 73% of our marijuana revenue.
Education was.
Probably my guess is the same, 73%.
Okay, thank you.
And it's significant.
Are there any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and open it up to agenda number 5. So we're opening up for public comments, and you may have some questions.
Yeah,
Yeah, did you guys have a breakdown of what you were planning to do with the Park SDS funds?
Park STC funds.
Oh, yeah.
So a breakdown of what we plan to do this next year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have too much coming out of Park STCs this year just because the number's low.
Okay.
And I think we have $20,000 is it. And that's just in case something comes up.
Gotcha, okay.
Right now, the goals from the city council are the track. They want to repair the track on the east side as their top priority. There's been requests for dugouts on the baseball field, requests for barbecue pits and benches, picnic tables, horseshoe pits, swings, and potential future amphitheater at some point in time. So these are the things that have been tossed out as concepts or goals for the future, mid-range to long-range goals out there. Some are short-term, some we can probably knock out.
Because what I was looking for, like, I think I had reached out to you both in like August and then, you know, several months prior, just this year about a trail that runs along the power lines and then from East Bend all the way to the park, about adding a trail there and then a community garden as well.
So that is part of West Side Trail Segment 1.
Okay.
The city submitted a request for plan design and engineering funds from Metro's Regional Flex Fund account, which was a bond measure. And we also have the regional local share funds, which I believe the city has access to. It's like $490,000 from that fund, but we have to do all this public engagement stuff that Metro's has now modified and changed, and they're expecting the cities to do the large public engagement component for the BIPOC population. And so we're still trying to figure out what exactly they want us to do.
Gotcha, okay.
Our diversity in and around our area is probably like, let's say 20% maybe, 20 to, it's not quite 30%. And so when we tried to apply for the Regional Flex Fund grant to do the preliminary engineering and studies, our project for that West Side Trail Segment 1, which would be the community gardens and the walk trail underneath the Bonneville lines and circle around and connect it to our trail along the riverfront there, it scored really low because our ethnic diversity in and around our area is not what it is in like Clackamas or Gresham or other areas. And so when we rate on a regional area, us and Sherwood are pretty much dead last. Because I think our TAZ, which is an area that Metro classifies us in, it takes Bull Mountain and it takes part of Sherwood, and there's just, it's probably not a very fair assessment, but it takes our region as a whole and then lumps us together. And so, I also believe that some of their numbers might be outdated.
Gotcha.
If you look at the new census data track coming out, our level of ethnic diversity within the city has increased substantially, and I don't think Metro's numbers take that into account as well.
So then would the next step to be like to keep following up with you guys or to try to reach out to, somebody at the county or?
So, Commissioner, Rosenthal from the Metro Commission, he was at our city council meeting a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a month ago now. But he was talking about maybe getting us some more attention on the Metro scale for this West Side Trail Segment 1. It might be something that we have to look at with the growth moving westward, putting some of the system development fees for the development that happens over there and allocate some of those funds to completing our portion of the West Side Trail segment as a park feature. So that's something that would be great if someone brought up in like the master planning piece at like a public hearing or an open house or one of those items that we have coming up and say, hey, I just want to make sure that the SDC funds account for the West Side Trail segment 1
Okay.
for parks and things of that nature. And
Hey,
it's something
Mike.
that I'll bring up to our control.
Mike,
Yes,
Councilor
Councilor Moore.
Moore, I'm just wondering if we can know who is speaking. Hi.
I was just asking her that, Kate. We should have asked her to introduce
I'm sorry,
herself.
my fault.
Oh, that's me. My name is Lizzie Gothier. I just live over, I'm technically unincorporated, so kind of tucked out by the park.
Would you, there's some people.
So Lizzie Goff, okay, is the name.
Thank
She's
you.
right off of the power line.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, I'm sorry, what did you say the SBC funds, you want them to count as, park funds as well?
Right, so when we develop our master plan, there's a financial component associated with that. And that financial component takes into account, road networks, park networks, any sort of civic, civil improvements, infrastructure-wise that has to go in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it takes that total capital cost and then divides it on a unit share cost. And it would apply that fee to the developer before they actually develop that property, right? And so to give you some ideas, like if you're developing up on River Terrace in Tigard, you would pay almost like a $55,000 to $65,000 system development charge to build a single-family dwelling unit up front. And that goes to your parks, your water, your sewer, stormwater, what else am I missing? There's a whole slew of it, roads, gas, like all that stuff goes into those expenses. And so that's something that our financial consultants are calculating right now is like, what's the total project cost? And then dividing it up on a per unit basis. So we look at the area over there, there's 528 acres, but of that 528 acres, you're looking at roughly 220, I think is the number that was set aside for like Goal 5 natural resource areas. These are areas that will stay like natural areas sort of thing. Maybe they're parks, maybe they can be doubled as parks, but they won't serve for like housing development or things of that nature, right? So that leaves you around 308, it's like between 310 and 320 acres of buildable land. And then you figure the total numbers of units that Metro kind of goals or shoots for is about 10 units per acre. So then you're looking at about 3,200 units, give or take 100. And so at that, then you would take the total number of all your infrastructure costs and divide it by those units. And I think initially our concept plan broke it down, and they were saying roughly about $40,000, $35,000 to $40,000 per unit. But given our current state of increasing interest rates and inflation and everything else that's going on, I'm sure that number has probably increased since then. But that would be the way to pay for those things.
Okay.
At least it's a surefire way.
And then what meetings did you say I should attend in the future?
So there's a question and answer online forum on June 14th, from 6 to 8. That'd be a good one to ask your questions to the consultants on, if they're gonna take the West Side Trail segment into consideration for park fees and funds, and how they can maybe set aside a park SDC for future growth. There's also going to be, public notices, sent out to everyone, within or 500-foot radius of the growth area and within city limits for when we do a public hearing on the master plan. And so my guess is that will happen around November, December, probably, with an adoption in January, February, possibly, for the master plan. I think that's our goal.
And so it would still take a number of years to get even a pathway, yeah,
Unless Metro steps up and grants us
okay.
funding to do it, right? And it is part of their larger regional trail system, but we don't have the $400,000 it would take to do it. Metro, if they want to, could help us out and help us get it done.
Also mentioned a community garden, and that is something that had been in discussion even before you were here. And from what I recall, one of the objections to doing that was the city's responsibility for maintenance in the power line area of a community garden, and then it just never got anywhere in discussion. Now, that was years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe things have changed.
You mean like the city's maintenance of the power lines, anything underneath the power lines, or just the fact that they're so close in vicinity?
Well, I'm just talking about the community garden in general. I don't do it, actually discussing where to put it, like maybe under the power lines right in that area. But then the question, I don't know if I can answer your question, but it was the maintenance involved and just the upkeep of a garden responsibility would become a responsibility of the city, I think. And that's where it just didn't get anywhere in the conversation at the time, but it was a different time too.
Yeah.
And I can't speak on behalf of the city right now, I'm not on the council. But I know that's come up before.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, yeah.
Yeah, so.
We should probably think at some point in time of if a park levy is something that the community is interested in, you know?
Also maybe writing some more grants. There is a lot of grant money out there for that. It just takes
Yeah.
a little effort and maybe the village to get together and write the grant.
Right, is that online or is that? Oh, sorry. If you're online, can you please make sure to mute, so that we don't have, some interference. We have enough interference here in the building, and, it might cause it to sound a little echoey or causing disruptions for our online folks. I just had a request through chat, that's what I'm saying.
I have one more public comment from the gentleman that, his name was, I'm gonna write it down, Lynn Uford, and he, wondered about if there is a budget fund for cleaning up kind of, lack of a term, a zombie house. And what he was talking about was houses in the King City Community Association. So I directed him to go to his homeowners association because we have, and I shared with him in prior city council meetings, it has been brought up, and most of the houses are in a homeowners association, and that is covered. But he came in and wanted to share his ideas, so I did want to get it on record, and it was Len, L-E-N, and the last name is U-F-F-O-R-D.
Uford.
Uford. I kind of told him that we probably wouldn't, and he should go do the homeowners association, but I'd like to share that.
No contact.
Probably something to explain to Lizzie, since she's in the audience today, is that, the city owns a small swath of area down near where the parking lot is. And then, the Edgewater Homeowners Association actually owns the swath up near them.
Okay.
They could probably do some community gardens in there if they were willing to, take a swath over there, or were willing to even dedicate a piece to the city or to the public so that we can do that. My concern was, I don't know if there's water lines, they'd have to probably put a tap and an extension on a water line with a meter to get water service over there, that's probably the struggle. The city doesn't even have potable water at our park. We pull the water from the water rights that we have out of the Swallow River to water the field. Part of that recycled water line is to hopefully bring some water down that line, and that would be an awesome use for that water at community garden as well. So, hopefully at some point in time, we actually have that service down there. I know it's our hope to have public restrooms at the park, as well as have that recycled water there, instead of pulling water out of the river. I mean, we'll keep it in mind and hopefully make something happen. With that, President.
Another question came up to mind, that you discussed the SDC charges and how they work, and from what I understand, the SDC charges for the park we have, it's a park SDC charge, but you also mentioned utility and road and all that kind of stuff that can be tied into SDCs.
Yeah.
That's not what we currently have, is it?
No, that's correct. So we do have, well, the transportation development tax is technically a road SDC, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But there's stipulations on that it has to be a regional,
Right.
arterial asset, right? Or collector, it has to be a regional collector. So that's an example of a transportation one. We have our park SDC, which is tagged on to each house that's built, within the area. And that goes to park improvement, capital improvement projects at the park for park facilities, basketball courts, tennis courts, playground structures, ball fields. I think it was very specific what was allowed in that, and those were the things that were kind of listed.
And so, for example, the development we mentioned before, the Ponderosa Pines, that will have an SDC for parks.
Yes, it will. Each unit will be assessed, I think it's something like 33 or 3,400 gallons a
It
unit.
hasn't changed.
Yeah, it goes up by whatever the CPI is every year.
Right.
And so it probably needs to go up again, when we assess fees, and then it goes up by the CPI every year. So,
How many units at Ponderosa Pines?
11.
yeah,
It's 11.
I think you're right, yeah, 11. And then there's 16 at the corner of 131st and Fisher. But again, we didn't really account for too much of that. Not sure how that's going to work.
Did you have any other questions over here?
No.
Okay, and I don't believe there's anybody on Zoom that's a part of the public.
Right.
Is it all?
Let me see. Let's go.
Be able to see a participation list.
Yeah,
All right.
now or forever older.
And you want to say anything?
All right,
Are you just trying to get to that screen?
I'm trying to get out of this, to just Zoom.
Are you trying to get out?
I'm trying to get to the Zoom screen.
Bear with us, everyone.
Yeah, I don't know what I did, so.
Is there a way to just close the presentation, stop share? Okay. I'll be right back. Can we just take a quick break?
Okay, we're gonna take a quick break, it'll be very quick.
The job, yeah.
I think one of the biggest issues that come up with the community garden, and that's what he mentioned. Running water into the facility, those are the problems.
We just have to add plumbing in there, that would be expensive.
It doesn't really got it.
Would be good garden, I would think, because of all the green that grows in swamps.
A lot of green. Not the best kind to have, but.
No, but it's better than what I was saying.
That's the last thing we have, we'll just take a quick break, and I just open it up. Everyone has to.
There you go.
They do. Public doesn't vote on the agenda, the plan. Pretty sure.
What was really good meeting, guys. What was your name?
Viva.
Viva, and what was yours?
I'm Sam.
Sarah, it was nice meeting you guys.
Thank you. And you think about, applying for that planning, I think there's 3 open positions. Yeah, and it's gonna be, there's gonna be a lot of work planning out to where Roger.
Okay.
And you just have to live in the urban growth boundary.
Okay.
You don't have to be in, as I said, Sam and I are also not, we're associated. And there's only a few of us. Yeah, I'm in King City too.
Yeah, I'm just outside of it.
Not in the next door thing because my neighbors kicked me out because I'm not in their homeowners association. And so I'm in line with Tiger. I'm just this little, hanging down at this Tiger because I'm in King City. But
I never did anything on that.
they booted me out.
Okay, the next door app is kind of hard.
I think you're, my wife.
Although that is where we have
That's what.
100 people for parade.
Are they?
I bet, yeah.
Probably. No, that's just very good.
People on a lot of property. Yeah, I think they're doing that.
Obviously, it's guns. I only use it for, like, we're having the shred day, or we're having a parade, but there's a lot of. Like, I peruse it by the headlines, oh, no.
I hope everyone's.
Next, I told them that. I mean, I'm from here. I am about the social, the one that keeps all the friends together. To the beach with. A couple of us went. Yeah, that's not, they actually worked pretty hard. They got somebody else to, another lead, and they worked with Kings, worked with next door to see how they could take me out. Well, I was working on, the 4th of July, and I thought, oh, you're working on the out where I'm trying to.
All right, guys.
You're great.
I'm gonna take my laptop just so you all can see us and put it up here on the podium. And, hopefully you can still hear me, but kind of lost the, video feed.
Okay, so we still have everybody on the line?
Yes, we still have, everybody's still on.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and close I think it's okay to close the public comments. There's nobody online from the public. If not, I'm gonna close that section of the agenda. Okay, so next we're moving into the number 6 item, which is the approval of the fiscal year 2022-23 budget, the proposed budget. And before we actually have a vote on it, normally if there's any changes that are going to be made, we'll address it with the motion for the thing. The only thing I can think of that, I don't know if we were thinking about changing it this year or wait till next year, has to do with the building maintenance budget between the police department and the city manager.
You wanna do it next year? I think
It doesn't really make a big difference.
you're gonna make that big of a difference.
Yeah, we can do the, I put in the approval
Yeah, you can make the amendment under the approved modification line right here, approved by budget committee, and move a portion of that building maintenance over to the police fund as well.
And leave it to your better judgment. I don't know, were there any other changes? I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah, I don't think there are any major changes. I think we need to monitor that court
Right,
program
right.
and see what we have going on there. I didn't really hear many questions or concerns as we went through it.
More clarification,
More clarifications, yeah.
you know, and expand.
And the uniform and cert supply, so we have that matching, so we have it matched on both sides there. The split with the general fund for the building maintenance.
Isn't the uniform and cert you thought would take care of when you switched to the new software?
Right, it'll say the same thing eventually.
It's an easy.
It's an easy, yeah.
Yeah, easy administrative fix.
It's a title clarification,
Yeah.
title consistency.
I didn't have any other large notes on mine for modifications or changes, so, and then with those two,
Okay, so we have to open this up for a motion to approve the budget meeting. Is there anyone that wants to make that motion? I could do that, right? Mr. President?
I think you want to entertain a motion.
I'll entertain a motion, okay, sorry, I should know this by now.
I move that we accept the budget as presented with the reallocation of the maintenance fee and clarification on the uniform and cert.
Any seconds?
Need
Anyone?
someone online?
I will second Viva's motion. This is Annie.
Thank you, Commissioner Paulson.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the budget meetings for 2022, 2023. All those in favor online, put up a hand, and here, put up a hand, live.
2,
I am in
3,
favor.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
And one.
And
1, so there are 6, 7, 8. Councilor Manellis, would you like to chime in? All right, so that gives us,
Okay, anybody not
that gives
approved?
us 9.
The whole bunch, is that?
Yeah. That gives us 9,
Mhm.
0, with no abstention.
So the budget, the proposed budget for 2022, 2023 for King City has been approved 9-0. And, approved
Thank
So-
you very much.
as of 11:41. This meeting is over.
do we have also move to adjourn the meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You may do that if you so desire.
Oh, I don't know if we need that.
I don't know if we need, let's do it anyway.
Okay, let's move to adjourn the meeting.
Anybody, any seconds to adjourn the meeting?
This is Kate, I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved in second to adjourn the budgetary meeting, and it's approved and open.
All right. Thank you all very much for attending today. Appreciate your input.
Well done, Mike. That's reflecting a lot of hard work.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Good day.
Thank you for your help.
Bye.
frequency.
Mhm.
So